world. Welcome to the 194th, believe it or not, climate change emergency protest here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I'm out on the Gettysburg National Battlefield. This is where 55,000 casualties occurred during the 3 days battle at Gettysburg. And it was largely a public that had become numb to war and expected casualties, but this was the largest amount of casualties in U.S. history at that time, and especially over 3 days. It was horrific. And little do people know, to the east of here was a person named General Custer engaging against the Confederate cavalry, the Southerners, in a cavalry battle, and it was the largest cavalry battle in the Northern Hemisphere ever, and it involved 5,000 horses. So it was really something stupendous and horrific going on here at Gettysburg. And where I'm standing now, when I was younger, in my 20s, this was a forest. The National Park has decided to cut it all down to give a glimpse as to how the battlefield looks back in the 1860s, 1863. But what has happened is, if you can see the house in the background here, there's a whole development, and what they've done is in the winter and the fall, you can see right into development. And it's not that the town's encroaching on the battlefield. The battlefield is doing policies right now that involve really bad environmental planning as to what's going on for the convenience of seeing the battlefield. And this is systemic of the U.S. government and governments in general, that they don't take climate change seriously. They don't choose to, even in spite of what's happening right now and what's going to happen. And it takes a long time to grow a tree. I can cut a tree down in probably 10 seconds, but it takes a lifetime to grow it and become meaningful as far as reducing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And they've cut down hundreds of acres of trees here, and there's little chance, no desire, no push as to replant this whole area. And why is that? It's because the public in this sleepy town, for example, has gone to sleep. They choose not to be engaged with the federal government or local governments or national, anything, regional governments. They choose to sleep their way through, sleep in, go to their 3 jobs, and don't worry about anything else. And it's understandable, but we're going to die. It comes down to that. And the question is when it's going to happen. I have my own opinions as to when things are going to go catastrophically out of control. But, whether I'm off by 5 years, 1 year, 20 years, it doesn't matter. It's within our lifetimes for most of us. And we're going to see utter catastrophe. And this is one example of this battlefield here, where it is federal government policies that fail to recognize, the dire situation we're in. Joe Biden has said it's an existential threat, but that means it's imminent. It's going to happen, and you better prepare for what's coming. And even Joe Biden himself doesn't do anything about it. Yeah, they had a climate change bill, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But all in all, these types of policies, if it's an existential threat, then you have massive policies. And people would volunteer to plant trees out here. No problem. They would do it. And people need to realize that you don't need a view. You need to survive so you can have a view. And without surviving, there are no views. It doesn't matter how many mental masturbations you have about the battlefield and everything else. If you're dead, your family's dead, or you're starving to death, or you lost your habitat, it doesn't matter what the hell's going on out here as far as what happened 150 years ago or 70 years ago, whatever it is. What matters is that you actually survive, and there's no case being made as to the survival. And I'll talk about that as what's going on. So this is an example where it's just too fucking inconvenient to get to things. It's just too, life is too easy here in Gettysburg and also in the United States in general. I'll go to the grocery store, I'll get my groceries, I'll get my gas, from my car that gets 50 some miles a gallon, but it's a carbon dioxide contributor. And, I'll go to the post office or have the mailman pick up my mail. I'll turn on TV and watch my satellite television and streaming and everything else, and I'll talk to you guys on here. It's just too convenient, and we're sleepwalking our way into a buzzsaw. And a buzzsaw is something that chews up lumber and doesn't think twice about it. And that's where we're headed right now. And my opinion as to when is happening is it's much, much sooner than what people can believe what is going to happen. And it's much, much more catastrophic than what I can even imagine. And that's what's coming. And we're going to sleepwalk our way into disaster. It's too convenient and too inconvenient to do anything about it. So right now, the northern hemisphere nations, and I'm so sorry for you people in the southern hemisphere. You guys are taking it on the chin right now, and we're ignoring what's going on. The northern hemisphere nations, and especially in the United States, are largely they have too good of a life. Everything's convenient, as I said, and things are just too easy. We turned a blind eye while rolling over on the couch to take a 4-year nap. We get engaged in politics every 4 years, and the choices we make are horrific. I mean, we're voting for lesser of two evils. And we just do this every 4 years or every 2 years. We'll go down and protest about a Supreme Court decision, or we'll worry about someone coming into office and doing a protest about that. Meanwhile, a very catastrophic, utterly destructive situation that are going to change all of our lives, not just some of the people in the brown skin wherever around the world or yellow skin here and there. It's going to affect all of our lives. And, people are failing to recognize what's happening right in front of their faces. We need a directed panic to take action. You need to panic, but you need to panic in a directed action, and you need to realize what's happening. Just open your eyes, wake up from your sleep. There's no national talk about climate change. Locally, there's no talk about climate change. I'll post on the local organizations, and I'll get 0 views on their websites, or 1, which is the administrator. Commendable for the administrator, but what the hell is going on with everyone else? It's unbelievable, and I'll talk about that in a second, too. We elect politicians that pretend they're going to get right on it, get right to climate change, get right on these issues, and nothing happens. It's the same story. You look back 30 years ago, it's the same exact hot button points that they're pushing your buttons, and they're pushing you around, and you don't even realize that you're being manipulated. The world's democracies are just totally asleep. The people are not engaged. They elect these people, stand back and let them do what they're not doing, and do greedy things. That's what they are getting accomplished, and that's about it. So no case is being made concerning climate change. There's no news about the effects of climate change. They'll report about what's happening, such as Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are the 2 largest reservoirs in the United States. They're literally running out of water. They're down to 25% capacity. And yeah, there's going to be a flood and a deluge, and it'll partially fill up, and everyone will go back to sleep and do whatever. And then it'll keep being drawn down. There's no national policy concerning water and electricity out there. Food production. Yeah, they did a little thing to cut back, I think, Arizona, like 21% of their water production, water usage, and Nevada or Utah or someone or other, 8%. This is a regional thing going on here. It affects all the way, 7 states out there in the West. And they're going to run out of water, and agricultural production is going to come to a grinding halt. And they're going to just continue on their way because it's too inconvenient to inconvenience everyone. They're coming up for re-election, and they're not going to do something that's severe. And when you're down to this point, you have 25% of your reserves left. You are getting down to Deadpool area, and the water there is just pure guck. And the people are going to end up having to leave, and they don't know why or what's coming their way. They should be demanding that action being taken by the federal government, and that includes, and this is kind of hard to say, is people need to move out of the area. People need no new building construction, things like that, no new buildings being constructed. If 3 people leave the area, then 1 person's allowed to move in. That kind of stuff needs to be done, and it's anti-democratic, but at this point, we've gotten to the point that some drastic actions need to be taken. And instead of having people move in to areas in the South or wherever else where they're put in harm's way, they need to think about having people not move in and have people actually leave those areas. So no case being made about climate change. If you go on world news, such as ABC last night, I'm just picking on them because they did crap news. Last night, they had about Trump's compound being invaded by the FBI and taking evidence. They had about tax evasion by one of Trump's cronies. They had an NFL quarterback as one of the top world news stories. They had about border crossings at the Mexican border, and this idea of putting people in cages didn't come about by the Republicans. It was the Democrats that started it, and then the Republicans made it horrifically worse. But it actually happened under the Obama administration where that started happening. Uh, People are unaware of what's happening around the world, you know. So there's no one political organization in this country that is above board and being honest about what they've done. They had also about carjackings, a carjacking, border crossings, a woman escaping a police car, and then they had about a toddler taking their first steps. Now they did have one thing about a brain-eating amoeba, but they did not attribute that to climate change. What's happening around the country is we're going to see an outbreak of this kind of stuff, where water levels get down to stagnant level, and then you have these eruptions of brain-eating amoebas and whatever else can be affected, like algae and toxic vapors coming out of the pools and things like that. And they're not attributing that to climate change, and they don't take things past where it's inconvenient. You know, they do it just so much. They report on an event, and then they move on to the next thing, such as an NFL quarterback, a carjacking, and a woman escaping a police car. And that's your world news. And good night, folks. So the news is for dummies, and a public willing to be a public willing to continue to sleep and not have to think about things. It's just too inconvenient, Jim, to think about things like this. The articles, if you look at ABC, NBC, CBS, for example, in this country, the news articles are exactly the same for the most part. Maybe a quirky little difference and a couple little fun little facts and things like that. But largely the news articles are the same. And the reason behind that is and I witnessed this, and I saw the dumbing down of America at that time was they used to have two competing news organizations, Associated Press and United Press International. And the day United Press International went out of business was the day America became absolutely stupid. And the problem is right now, we're into our second and third generation of dummies. And I don't know how we're ever going to get out of it. You can't educate a person that doesn't want to have to think. Okay, so there's no forward thinking about what's happening. And we are really the nation of idiots. And this is the direction we're headed. It's a public willing to sleep and sleep and sleep and go to their 3 jobs and not think about why they're working 3 jobs. So we're risking utter catastrophe. There are no trees out here. This area here, there are no freaking trees, okay? This drives me crazy. I used to run through forests and not have to, and you know, in the winter when the winds would blow when I'm running, I could actually count on the forest as a windbreak. Animals were all over the place. You had fantastic amount of birds and wildlife and things like that. You know, my running buddy that I used to run with as a young guy, we'd stop and watch animals like foxes and things running through the woods and deer and whatnot. But now this area is it's becoming a ghost town, and this is what's happening. Things are just out of control, and people are sleepwalking their way through life. So what happens is people go home, play their computer games to relax because they're tired of life itself. And it's childish behavior in that all this climate change catastrophe, which they know nothing about because they haven't been educated by the politicians or media. But it's utter childish behavior to be playing your computer games when the whole world, and especially here in the United States, they're about to die. And they don't even realize what's happening. Okay, this is one example. I posted on 3 websites here in our county, and you know who you are, and they're supposedly liberal, forward-thinking people. I posted 3 articles about 2 counties over. They're projecting by 2053, which it won't be that late, but by 2053, the heat index, 2 counties over, Lancaster County, is going to be 125 degrees heat index. That is utter catastrophe. That is unsurvivable. You will not live through that. If you go outside or your electricity goes off, you will die within a matter of hours. That's just a fact. But you know how many responses I got? I think I got 1 response on one of the websites by the administrator, another response by another administrator there, and on the main one, which is the big one in the county, a certain political organization, no responses, no nothing. 125 degrees is what's coming for this area, and no responses at all. Can you believe that kind of stuff? I'm utterly shocked as to what's happening. They're worried about local political races, which are important because that determines policy. But in reality, 125 degrees is coming whether there's a Democrat or a Republican in charge, because they're the only 2 parties allowed to run in these elections anymore. We don't have a democracy, whereas one party, for example, in the main election was kicked off the ballot by another party who you think are progressive and forward-thinking, but they literally got the one party removed from the ballot in the general election. So this is the kind of anti-democratic ideals we're having here in the United States. Not willing to look ourselves in the mirror and go, hey, this is wrong. So the risk we're running with these kind of increases in temperatures and everything like that, you know, they're saying by 2053 that there's going to be a 125-degree heat index, and that is way wrong. We're risking very soon there's going to be an El Nino event. Right now we're in La Nina in the Pacific Ocean, which largely is that the oceans are cooler at the surface, and you know, it's fairly comfortable. Even though we're having these utter disasters and droughts and things like that, El Nino will come, and it won't be too long, like next year or the following year, and the oceans will suddenly vent off all the heat that they've been storing up, and the atmosphere gets suddenly a lot warmer. Also, when we're cleaning up the air, which we need to do, you're losing your aerosol masking effect, meaning the pollution in the air is going to go away, and the sun will beat down even more on the land, and you know, that'll cause a rise in temperature as well. The sunspots are increasing right now, meaning it's a brightening sun, so that's going to cause more heating as well. So all these events are going to come to play within the next few years, next year, or the following year, or the following year after that, but it won't be long. And we're going to have dramatic heating. And also what happens is when you have dramatic heating, you have increase in methane due to the permafrost melting, and also the methane hydrates, clathrates, sorry, at the bottom of the oceans that are frozen are going to vent to the surface. And methane is one of the worst greenhouse gases out there. Initially, in the first 2 years, it's 162 times more potent molecule versus molecule than carbon dioxide. So it's a horrible greenhouse gas. And yes, after 2 years, it drops down to 80 times more potent. And after 20 years, it drops down to like 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. But it's a horrible greenhouse gas. And this is the risk we're running because we're running feedback loops. And the hotter it gets, the more the Arctic heats up, and the Arctic region, such as Siberia and the Arctic area itself, Norway, things like that, northern Norway, Sweden, places that have permafrost are actually going to be venting off massive amount of methane. So we're having all these events that are coming in next year, the following year, or the following year, and people don't even realize why it's going to happen, what's happening. You know, they can tell you inside out about the Kardashians or some football player or this or that, but they know nothing about what's coming their way as far as climate change goes. So you run the risk with these feedback loops is more vicious hurricanes, which it's been very calm in the Caribbean so far, but you know, they predicted a lot of hurricanes. For example, right now, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, is 85 degrees and above. The water is. You need 78 degrees to generate a massive hurricane. 85 degrees, catastrophic hurricanes is what we're risking at that point. There are going to be floods, more floods, or drought, or fires. You know, when El Nino comes, I don't know what's going to happen. In the past, it used to be things would reverse somewhat, and it'd go the opposite direction. You get too much water and not enough, you know, not enough drought or whatever, not enough drying. So things are going to spin in a direction that I don't have a clue anymore because the weather is so messed up. But what we're risking is the loss of food production out west, for example. What's going to happen is you're going to see a dramatic drop in food production, you know, and people don't even realize that we're going to suffer from that. And we keep relying on foreign foods. If you look at your food in the grocery store in the United States, it's largely from somewhere else and not here in the United States. So we're also risking habitat loss. People are losing their houses right now due to climate change, fires and floods and things like that. Kentucky can attest to that for the floods, and you know, the entire West with the fires. If you're burned out of your house, you are a climate change refugee. You might not realize it, and people should be protesting at that point, going, "Hey, this is actually stupid what we're doing with these policies." College kids aren't protesting as to what's going on. And their lives, you know, they're going to college studying and they're spending $200,000 on an education for a career that they'll never have the way direction we're going. There should be massive protests on college campuses, especially out west, and I don't understand the lack of action. You know, I had a family relative tell me, you know, no, we can't affect anything. Well, you know what? If you're 18 to 35 years old, you can be a huge block and cause dramatic political changes in the direction things are going just by your protesting and being active and in the politicians' faces as to what's going on. And, you know, back in 1980, I went to New York City. I drove from here, a little town near here, and drove from my college campus. I can't tell you which. But anyways, I drove, when I was 20 years old, I drove to New York City, engaged in the anti-nuclear protest because we're going to die of nuclear war. And that got the brakes put on it. Reagan and whoever the heck it was Gorbachev or whoever, actually negotiated, and we're still benefiting from the fruits of that until now, of anti-nuclear war. So we got things changed. There were over 1 million protesters at the time there in New York City, and that let the politicians know that people weren't going to take it because the United States was waking up to it. The world was waking up to, the potential for nuclear war, and we weren't going to take it. So they actually got things done. So the idea that if you protest, things don't get done, that's poppycock. Politicians get scared of massive public protests. So if you're in Europe, if you're in China, if you're in Japan, if you're in the United States, if you're in South America, Brazil, for example, if you're protesting, the politicians do wake up. They might actually start smacking around and have some blood loss, but in the long run, things get changed when the public fully engages with the government. So what we're running the risk is with this 125 degree, heat index prediction and anything in general, human beings can only take 93 to 95 degrees as far as wet bulb temperature. If the heat index, if the humidity plus the temperature is above 93, 95 degrees, things like that, the human body can't cool down. So you sweat, but it doesn't do any good. And the danger is if it's sustained in a long heating event, you cannot cool down at night if you don't have air conditioning and things like that. And people get then heat exhaustion and heat stroke and then eventually die as a result. So right now people are sleeping in. The alarms have gone off. They're hitting the snooze button constantly. And this is an allegory. Okay, so they're hitting the snooze button on life. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to get things done. It's too inconvenient. I want to sleep in and not have to think about things. It's too scary. It's too much. You can't affect anything. What good is a protest? What good is one person doing what I'm doing? Well, my hopes was by now, this is number 194, my hopes were that people were actually going to get involved and start doing their own broadcasts and things like that. And I'm one of thousands then at that point doing the same thing. This isn't difficult, even though it takes a shit ton of time out of my life. But, people would actually start getting things done. And right now, nothing's getting done. And I'm 194 into these things. It's crazy. So people are sleeping in. It's too much, too scary. It can't affect things. It's going to happen anyway. I'm going to vote for the lesser of two evils. Don't you think you deserve better than that, than the lesser of two evils? Don't you think you should demand better than this from your politicians? Are you willing to take this and the lesser of two evils? That's it? That's all you're worth? Yeah, this is a mental crisis going on with our country. And what happens is that the lack of democracy and the lack of engagement leads to a lack of democracy. And pretty soon you've lost everything by deciding not to be engaged and not take effects. And the result of a lack of democracy and lack of political intervention by the public is this. You end up in war. And that's the final solution for things. War makes everything better. It makes a body good. So, it's a waste. It comes down, this battle was, for example, a battle of corporations. It was the northern industrial corporations versus the southern industrial corporation, which was slavery. And people couldn't realize that it was wrong to enslave other human beings. And what happened was people were willing to die in the South to fight for a cause that they didn't even have slaves, most of them. The very wealthy had slaves, or a few households had slaves. But all in all, they got riled up and told to believe that it's states' rights, and things like that, and you're here, you Yankees, and you don't deserve. And no, what happened was you got convinced that this was your battle, and rather than trying to change the institution of slavery from within down south, they resorted to this, and it was war, and people died by the thousands and hundreds of thousands. I think the calculations were, if you factor in disease and other things happened, 600,000 to 1 million people died as a result of that. Not only the people that died in battle or died of disease, then the families were affected. They couldn't make food. They couldn't get food. They couldn't do this. They lost their habitat, lost their lifestyle, all sorts of things. Early death, who knows? So you deserve better than this. You deserve to have something good coming your way. And it's a true mental crisis going on in the United States and around the world. You just sleepwalk your way through, and this is what happens, is you end up in this type of situation where it's war, and you're convinced that the issue is this, when in reality it is something else. And if you don't want to correct it, then you got a real mental crisis going on. And actually need to do something about your thought process and demand better from your politicians. You guys deserve better than this as to what's happening. So I'll catch you next week, and hopefully something will have happened by then for the positive, but I doubt it. It'll be number 195. See ya.